This podcast is brought to you by MHA of Dutchess County and produced by CMJW Entertainment. This episode of the Vital Women podcast is proudly sponsored by Salt Boutique Labs. You're listening to the Vital Women podcast.
Welcome back to the Vital Women. I am your host, Yvette O'Sullivan. In this episode, we sit down with Susan Bigler, a powerhouse in human resource and advocate for professional and personal transformation. Susan's journey from overcoming significant life hurdles, including homelessness and single motherhood, to becoming a certified HR personnel and life coach is nothing short of inspiration. We dive deep into how women can reclaim their identity, lead with transparency, and bridge the gap between corporate strategy and human connection. Susan, it is a pleasure to have you here today. I know we have been talking for a while to have you on the show, and I'm super excited that you have the opportunity to be here with me today.
Thank you so much, Yvette. It is my pleasure to be here. Super excited about our conversation.
Absolutely. So Susan and I, we met a while ago, I don't know, back in March maybe of 2025. And we met at this event and we started talking, and we must have talked for about an hour, and we hit it off. And I said to her, I'm going to reach out to you one day and ask you to be on my podcast. And here she is.
Yes. And we didn't know each other at all. And we had so much alignment in our thinking and our experiences. It was really a fantastic first meeting. I couldn't believe how much we had in common.
Absolutely. Well, Susan, before I dive into more serious questions, I am loving your logo in the background. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
I can. Thank you, Yvette. Funny story. My last name being Bigler. Several years ago, I was at the beach with my husband, and there was a hippie playing a guitar just down from us. And so being the shy person that I am, I went over and started chatting up with him. And he asked me my name, and I said, Bigler, Susan Bigler. And he said, oh, like bigger than life. And that was a decade ago. So I tucked that in the back of my mind, and I thought, when I start my business, that's going to be the name of the business. And so my logo is my signature with just bigger than life on it. And then I thought, my personality has always been a little big, kind of cartoonish. I love humor. And so I had these beautiful headshots taken, and I thought it just looks a little too formal to be with my bigger than life name and my signature. So I made it into a cartoon character. So I kind of felt like it really captured my personality and the excitement and enthusiasm that I have.
I love it. I love it. For someone who tends to be very serious, I love when people can freely have that sense of humor and just allow themselves not to be taken too seriously.
My sense of humor has saved my sanity on more than one occasion.
That's great to hear. But let's get a little bit down to business here. So Susan, you've navigated so many chapters in your life, from corporate leadership to being an empty nester and entrepreneur. How can a woman tell when she's simply busy versus when she's actually outgrowing her current version of herself, which happens a lot to women once they enter midlife?
I love that question, Yvette, because as women, we are busy, and busyness is the thief of today. So many times, I have found myself doing tasks and not really being productive. So good intentions of being productive through busyness can sometimes lead us to a dull life that's just full of tasks. And so I've also used busyness as a distraction from having to handle or deal with something that I just didn't want to deal with. So distraction from fear. I'm too busy to think about it. I'll get to that later. And so to me, being busy is the antithesis of what we want to be. When we don't feel that peace anymore, it may be time to move on. I know that when I've gone through different transitions in my life, the best time for me to regroup has been when I've just been still and let the chaos go on around me and just be still for a minute so that I can think. Because when we get busy, sometimes we don't think, we're just moving. So I feel like if you find yourself checking off those lists, those tasks on a list, but you're not feeling fulfilled, or you're feeling a little bit of a scrape inside your gut, I'll say, it may be time to step back and take a minute and say, why am I feeling this way? What am I avoiding? What am I not being fulfilled through? And what's going to fulfill me? We have to move. We have to move to grow, but we all have gifts that were given to us by our Creator. And if we're not sitting and using one of the many gifts that He gives us, then I think we're missing our purpose in life. And we'll know that we're missing our purpose because we're not going to feel that settled feeling in our gut.
Very, very powerful what you're saying. However, it's very difficult for women to find that stillness. I know for me, for the last 3 months, I've been working on finding that stillness and trying to figure out where am I going in life because I have all these goals that I have set for myself, and I just want to move through them very quickly. But it's not easy finding that
It's
quiet space and just having yourself, take it 1 minute at a time and figure out who you are and where you want to go.
I so agree with that, Yvette. And I found a rhythm in my life when my kids were actually in high school. So I was coming into that transition of about to be an empty nester. And I found myself in that situation of feeling unsettled and just a little lost in who I am and what was my purpose. And so what I decided to do was take one day a month. And it was my day. I did nothing for anyone else. I sat my family down. We had a meeting. It was typically on the weekend. We had a little family meeting, and I said, listen, every third Saturday is Susan Day, not Mom Day, not Wife Day, not Businesswoman Day. It's Susan Day. And sometimes I would just lay on the couch, or sometimes I would go for a walk in nature. But I never did the kitchen. I never cleaned the kitchen. I never cooked. I never did any of those duties that I needed to do during the rest of the week. I just took time out. And the rule was the house had to be the same in the same shape it was on Friday, on Sunday. They could not leave me with a messy kitchen or messy house. They had to respect that. And that helped me tremendously. I did that for a couple of years, one time a month, just put my family on hold. And they knew it was only due to self-care and it was important. It made me a better mom and a better wife and a better person overall. And it gave me more clarity of where I needed to be to find that peace again.
That is terrific. That's a wonderful tip. It's important for women to take some time for themselves and just do nothing. And like you said, to start small, 1 month at a time. If we can't, find time for ourselves on a daily basis, 1 month at a time. Thank you
Yep.
so much for that tip.
And it doesn't mean going and spending time with your girlfriends. It means alone
Hmm.
so that you can have those discussions without any of the distraction of others. But yeah, once a month it worked.
Great. I see. I see. You've done so much. We're going to talk more about what you've done with finding out who Susan is in terms of, I want to dive a little bit about the experience that you had. And we actually didn't unpack this prior to the show. But if you don't mind, you're such a strong person today. And I'm so curious. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience when you were homeless and how did that help you become who you are today?
Oh, that time of my life was so hard. I was actually a single mom at the time, and yeah, single mom. I couldn't afford the rent where I was living. I got evicted. So we were out of a place to live for a little while. I immediately kicked into survivor mode. And, unfortunately, desperate people do desperate things. So I'm not going to say that all the decisions that I made at that time were healthy decisions for me, but they were the decisions that I needed to make to keep myself and my son safe. And through a lot of prayer and a lot of community that I had, I was able to rebuild my life. I was able to scrape up enough money I mean, I was working. I was a working poor single mom, like so many other people are. And I was able to find just a little loft that was in top of a girl's apartment that my son and I lived in. It was basically a closet that fit his crib, and I had a little air mattress. And so from there, I just felt like, okay, well, I have found us a place to live that's safe. And that it wasn't ideal, but that little piece of I did this, I found something, and I'm providing for myself was such a such a boost for me because I was going into that time feeling very alone and very much like I was a loser. Um, I couldn't take care of my son or myself, but what I realized is I had always relied on someone else to help me to take care of
Mm.
me. I had never in my life had a time where it was all on me. And once it was, and I realized it was and accepted it, I just started forging forward. And I moved very quickly from that closet to someone's garage, and from that garage into another apartment. So um, it, I think most of it was up here.
Mm.
Once I turned my thinking from feeling like a failure to feeling like a fearless survivor. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yes, it does because it leads into the question of finding the more. So it's that journey to fulfill a void that perhaps you were seeking in someone else, and you knew you had to provide that void within yourself. So
Yes.
how do you go from being in a situation, in a tough life situation, to being successful? And for it to show on paper, what is the first step for a woman who feels that that tug of life and those hurdles are pulling her down? And like you said, you had to stop being afraid. So what gave you that spark, that fire for you to do that?
I think it was the desperation that I, nobody else is going to take care of me. I have to take care of myself. And, that's a realization that so many of us don't want to take. We think that somebody's always going to come around and take care of us. And that's not the case. We are really and truly here. If we're lucky enough to have a partner in life, then that's one thing. But truly, we come in out to this world on our own and we leave on our own. And we need to own what's in between those dashes, as they say. I think preparing and getting clarity over what it means to be fulfilled is huge. I have realized over the years that a title really doesn't mean anything. A successful business doesn't mean that I'm successful or that I'm fulfilled. You mentioned the words successful on paper. That looks so different to me than what real success is. I had a dad who groomed me to be very successful. I was going to be the career woman, and if you didn't make X amount of money, you weren't a success. And if you didn't meet these people, you weren't a success. And what I found was once I checked all those boxes and I met this very high level of expectation that my dad had on me, I was so not happy. I was disconnected from my family. I was disconnected from my friends. It was all about the money. And I think we make a lot of mistakes sometimes thinking that success has a dollar sign in front of it, and it doesn't. Success to me is having a peace over who I am, knowing who I am, knowing that I'm worthy of a good life and that I'm able to provide myself that good life, because it really starts between my ears with my thought
But you're
processes.
absolutely with our thought process, knowing that our creator says that we are worthy and that
Yes.
we are wonderfully and perfectly made.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times we forget that.
We do. Society tells us that we are compared to everyone else, but we have to shed that and not be comparing ourselves. There's only
Absolutely.
one us.
So it sounds to me that you have used a lot of those life skills, to lead in your profession as well, building trust first with yourself.
Mhm.
So when you build that trust with yourself, what strategy or what is the second strategy you use to build trust within the people that you work with, especially being, a lead in the HR department?
I think the most important thing for me is I never forget where I was. You brought up the homelessness, and immediately my heart hurts a little bit because I remember those times and how I felt. But every one of us have stories in our past or current circumstances that are going on. And for me, I think it's important to remember that we never really know what's happening with other people. So I try to create a very safe space for anyone that I'm consulting with or working with, to make sure that I remember that we all put our pants on the same way, that instead of being intimidated by their titles, I keep in mind that we all do have a story. um, one of my one of my mantras for my kids has always been, just walk in like you belong there.
Mm.
And, I'm not really big keen on fake it till you make it, but I am keen on that we belong where we are. And that sometimes we find ourselves in places and we're like, what am I doing here? I don't belong here, but you do, because you are there. And so we have to claim that and walk in like we belong there. And I also think it's important for us to remember that everybody has a different perspective based on their experiences. And nobody else has my perspective
Mm.
because they don't have my experience. No one else has your perspective. And so that alone, when we walk into a room, we have something important to share that nobody else on the face of this earth has, and that's our perspective. So I think it's important to remember that, to give ourselves that confidence, and then to establish community, because in a company, we're one company with many people, just like we're one body with many parts. So we're going to be different. We're not going to necessarily agree. We're going to have different levels of skill set, but let's figure out what that is first. And then we're going to parlay that into working like a fine-tuned machine and, go kill it for a paycheck. I think it's establishing that community before we go into strategy is really important.
I
A
love what
strategy
you
is no good if you don't know the players and what the skills are.
Absolutely. I love what you said, and I hope my audience takes that into account that we belong. And as you mentioned, also, we all put our pants the same way. So we may have some different struggles, but we all have two things in common. We belong
Yep.
and we put our pants the same way. So thank you for that.
Yes.
I don't think I'll ever forget that.
I don't know my dad probably told me that. I don't know, but I've always remembered it, and I think it's just a great little tip.
Absolutely. It certainly is. So, Susan, we see so many professionals connecting nowadays through behind a screen.
Mm.
How do we, as women or young women that are working on bridging the gap or coming into themselves in a professional world, how do you avoid that? Or what can you say, to be more personable, to be face to face? Because as I mentioned, when we first met, we really hit it off and we spoke for about an hour. And there's nothing greater than having a conversation with a person face to face as having conversations behind a screen. And I know we're doing it right now, but it's easy because we already built that connection
Right.
when we met in person. So what
Right.
can you recommend?
Well, it's so interesting to me that we have all this technology in society and we're very connected that way, but very isolated and lonely in real life. So I think it's something that happens to us physiologically when we shake a hand and look someone in the eye. It's something about that physical touch that immediately sparks something physiologically inside of us. I think that shaking someone's hand gives us that energy to give and receive. And then looking someone in the eye is so important. It gives a sense of sincerity. I was just at a second chance job fair for people who were justice involved. And we literally had to show them and practice with them how to look someone in the eye when they shook a hand because of the shame they may have felt for the decisions they made in the past. And that was just such a reminder to me that when we look in someone's eyes, it's sharing a sacred moment. And, have you ever been to a place when someone shakes your hand but is looking around to see who else is in the room? I think that's so
Yes.
disrespectful.
It's disrespectful and you're not making a connection, or when the handshake is very weak, because as humans we yearn for touch. So a nice
Yes.
firm handshake already indicates, okay, we're making a connection, you're interested in who I am
Yes.
and what I have to say. So it's very important and powerful to have both skills, soft
It, it
skills.
it really is, and the only way to get those skills is to practice. So at that same job fair I was telling you about, we were teaching people how to really shake a hand, not the loose handshake or like hold my hand for a minute. Let's don't break it. Let's just shake it, and it's such an important first impression. So we need to be careful and very intentional on how we do that. And for the younger women that may be listening, please learn how to do that. That will give you a sense of power when you walk into those rooms that you're scared about. If you just look someone in the eye and shake their hand strong, you'll feel like you do belong because you'll be receiving that same sincerity back, hopefully.
Absolutely. I hope, as the younger generation rise up, I hope it's not a skill that is lost, because to me
Mhm.
it's very important. That eye
Agree.
contact and that handshake says a lot.
Mhm. It really does.
So thank you for that. So what does being professional and persevering actually look like in 2026, since we're talking about the younger generation? So how can we stay grounded when the workplace culture around us is constantly changing and sometimes even feel chaotic?
Oh, it feels so chaotic between all the information overload and legislative changes and institutional changes. Teammates are in menopause, people are retiring, there's new teammates. It's just swirling around us. And it's very difficult. It's funny, when you and I were prepping for this call, I thought she's been living in my life for the last 3 months, and I've been able to practice professional perseverance. So I love it. What I do every morning to prepare myself is I spend some time alone out on my back porch with nature. I pray a little bit, I read a little bit just to get my mind set in a positive mind frame. And then I take a lot of deep breaths during the day. My workplace is surrounded with affirmations because sometimes my mind will start whispering things that aren't true. And so I have affirmations everywhere in my bathrooms, in my workspaces, both at home and in my office, because it's just a way for me to stay mindful and keep things in perspective. I also think that there's a formula to our thinking that we really need to be aware of. We have I'm going to call them trees that we can think out of. We can think out of the tree of life, which is giving us freedom and grace and forgiveness and goodness, or we can live out of the tree of knowledge, which is bondage, law. You've got to be legalistic. You're condemned when you make a mistake. And it's very important for us to choose which tree we're going to live out of. And if we choose that tree of life, we're going to be forgiving of ourselves and others. We're going to be more free to be who we are because we're going to feel secure. But if we live out of that tree of knowledge that's going to condemn us every time we make a mistake, we're going to have a horrible day. We're going to be so affected by what's going on around us. And so to me, every morning I wake up and I think I'm going to live in a positive mindset today. And that doesn't mean that 3 hours later, I don't have to readjust, because I might find myself going towards that negative thought process. And it takes practice to stop those thoughts, to grab them and throw them away and say, no, that's not true. I'm going to focus on what is true. So it's if we adjust our thinking, then we can adjust our feelings, which eventually adjusts our whole soul.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love that, readjusting, and every couple of hours readjusting. And with
Sometimes by the minute.
that's true. That is so true. So with that being said, behind the hustle, and how do you get women that you work with in your job to strip back that external noise? I know you spoke about yourself and the things that you do throughout the day to continue with that positive mindset, but how do you help them to find a purpose that actually sustains that long hold for them throughout the day?
Well, I think at first we have very honest, hard conversations. When we notice we're a very tight team, and when we notice that one or three of us are spiraling, not having that good thinking, we tend to hold each other accountable for it and pull each other aside and say, hey, what's going on? And I love that because we're honest with each other, we're transparent, we're not afraid to say the wrong things because we work together, we're a team. And as women, we need that community. The hormones play a part in it. Our home life plays a part. We have all of these spokes in our wheel of life. But for what I found best for my team is to have those hard conversations, to confront what it is that's bothering them. And sometimes it's just walking each other off the ledge and say, well, okay, once we share what it is on our mind that's making us spiral or feel, I'm going to say yucky, when we say it out loud so many times and we hear ourselves say it, it's really nothing. We've just built it up in our minds. So I think the community is really important to have, whether it's on your work team or your social family, whatever that is. We need to have people we can be vulnerable with and can help walk us off that ledge to help us see things in a different perspective.
I love that. And it is important to have that honesty and to be authentic and not to be afraid, because like you said, a
Yes.
lot of the times it's up here in our heads that we are creating certain scenarios, but if we are able to communicate that with the person or people that we are working with, it can become so much easier instead of dragging the same scenario along in our minds.
Absolutely. And it's all done in love. It's never easy to have those conversations, but if we do it in love because we really care about the person, then that's what creates that safe space for them to be honest about what they're thinking. And sometimes their honesty hurts. If I'm the target of their honesty, sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't asked that. But I'm glad because then we can change. We can change the situation or talk it out.
Absolutely, work on it together. So
Yeah.
life lessons when it comes to longevity. You've been in your career for 30 years. So, how do you balance the high level of your career and your marriage and the low levels of your career? What is one lesson from your personal partnership that has been surprisingly made you a better leader in your professional world?
There's so many lessons, but I'm going to try to say one. My husband is the most patient, kind, forgiving person that I've ever met. He has forgiven me for some really bad decisions, especially early on. And so what he's taught me he challenges my thinking without disrespecting my intelligence. Uh, and
And
I
that's
think that
important. That's very
it's,
important.
it's very important because 30 years ago when he would challenge my thinking, I always interpreted it that he thought I was dumb or he thought, he was smarter than I was. But what I've learned is that he knows my intelligence. He's just trying to stretch my perspectives. And I think that in itself has helped me to be a better leader at work because we don't have to agree on everything. At work, we're not going to agree on everything. At home, my husband and I don't agree on everything, but we do agree to disagree. I'll go back to what I said earlier. We all have perspectives. There's really only one truth, and the rest of it is opinion. And so I keep that in mind. I think that I listen I know I'm talking a lot today, but I really am a good listener.
No.
And
Well, that's why we're here, is to learn about you and those, tricks and tips that you have used as a 30-year, career in HR, and the challenges, for our audience to find out what it takes when you allowed your mind to develop and grow, because it's all about growth. Like you said, 30 years ago, you probably thought that when your husband was asking you or challenging, you had a certain perspective. Now, when he does that, you have a different perspective, and that comes through growth.
It does. And I want to just point out that growth does not equal age.
Exactly.
I think that, a lot of times people think I'll get there when I'm, 50, I'll get there when I'm 60, and it can happen at any time in our lives. We need to grow all the time. We need to be in a perpetual growth mode. But I think, going back to leadership and lessons learned, listening well without judgment, not taking things personal. Silence is sometimes better than a response immediately, to let whatever we're listening to digest in us before we respond. And then remembering that correction and discipline are actions of love. They're not to condemn, but they're to protect the company, protect our clients. But the discipline piece is always a little funky because it's not easy, but to give or receive, but it's necessary in order to grow and to protect our brand.
Absolutely. And besides, sitting still, silence sometimes can be very challenging for us. But it is part of our growth. So
It is. I can remember back in the day asking my husband when it was quiet before he was my husband, "What are you thinking about? And he'd say nothing. And I'd be like, how can he not be thinking about anything? We're always thinking about something." And I came to find out he really wasn't thinking about anything. Meanwhile, my mind was racing with ideas or questions. And that's an art, to learn how to be still in the intimacy of silence.
absolutely, certainly is. So we're coming to a closing of our show. So what is the final vital takeaway? Is there one thing that you want every woman listening to remember about her own capacity for renewal, for what would it be like for her to grow and to challenge herself with that stillness and quietness?
I think the biggest takeaway is that it's never too late to change your mind and make different choices. So many times we get in a habit, we get in a rut, and we forget that we have choices every day about everything in our lives. I had that discussion with my mom a couple of months ago. She said, "Well, Susan, I've always been this way. I'm 80 something and I've always been this way and I always will." And I said, "Well, with that attitude, you will, but you don't have to. You can still change." And so I think that's my biggest takeaway, is that you have more choices than you realize, and you can change your mind anytime you want to.
I love that. I love that, because I think sometimes society tells us that we're not allowed, or we allowed ourselves to be placed in that box that we cannot change our mind. So thank you for that.
We have a lot of choices every day and we live in those choices. So if you're not happy, make the choice to change.
To change. I love that, Susan. Well, thank you so much for your time, for being here on The Vital Women. And to my listeners, if you like what you heard today, please subscribe to The Vital Women. And Susan, you are amazing. And please continue to advocate for women out there and to be the supportive person that you are.
Thank you so much, Yvette. It's been my pleasure.
This podcast is brought to you by MHA of Dutchess County and produced by CMJW Entertainment. This episode of the Vital Women podcast is proudly sponsored by Salt Boutique Labs,